Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. The night my wife told me she wasn't obligated to be intimate with me, something in me went quiet. Not angry, not defensive, just quiet. Like a light switch flipped, and everything that once felt warm suddenly turned cold. We'd been married 9 years. 2 kids. A mortgage. Weekends at soccer games. From the outside, we looked like every other couple in our suburban corner of Denver. Starbucks cups in hand, matching Yeti tumblers in the car, smiles for the neighbors. But behind those smiles, something had been rotting for a long time. That night, she stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She said it calmly, almost like she'd practiced. "You can't expect me to be intimate on demand." I remember the word expect hitting harder than the rest. Like I was some kind of boss demanding performance. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, nodded once, and said, "Okay." That, "okay," was the last word I said to her for 3 days. Not because I was trying to punish her, because I realized something. If she could choose when to give, I could choose when to give too. Not affection, not words, but everything else. Effort, time, attention, care. The next morning, I didn't make her coffee like I always did. Didn't check her car before she left for work. Didn't send a text to ask if she made it safely. When I got home, I didn't start dinner or fold the laundry waiting in the dryer. I just sat on the couch, scrolled through my phone, and let the silence stretch. By the 3rd day, she noticed. The tone changed from cold to confused. She asked if I was mad. I told her I wasn't. I just didn't feel like providing on demand. The look in her eyes flickered. Surprise, maybe guilt. But she didn't say anything. I went to the gym that evening, stayed late, grabbed a burger from Five Guys on the way home. Ate in the truck, watching the lights of the neighborhood flicker in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pressure. I didn't feel like anyone's source of comfort or stability. I just felt neutral. When I got back, the house was quiet. She was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, untouched cup of tea next to it. She looked up at me, and for a split second, I saw something crack in her expression. Not anger, not resentment. Fear. That's when it hit me. She never believed I'd actually stop showing up. She thought I'd argue, plead, compromise. She thought I'd keep holding the balance while she decided when to participate. But I wasn't angry. I was calm. Too calm. And that calmness scared her more than any fight could have. She closed her laptop and said quietly, "Are we okay?" I told her the truth. I don't know. And for the first time in our marriage, she didn't have an answer either. That's where everything started to unravel. The next week felt like living with a stranger who happened to know all my habits. We moved through the house like 2 ghosts sharing the same space. Polite, distant, and unbearably quiet. I still went to work, still dropped the kids off at school, still mowed the lawn on Saturday. But everything in between had changed. The rhythm we'd built over years, her morning playlist on the Sonos, my Saturday runs in my worn-out Nike shoes, her laughter echoing from the kitchen, all of it vanished into the static of routine. She tried, at first, to act normal. She'd ask about my day, about the new project at work, about whether I'd seen her favorite mug. But my answers were short. Not cruel, just detached. I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't chasing approval or pretending everything was fine. I was living in quiet observation, and that silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. One night, I came home late from the gym again. The kids were asleep. The lights were dim. She was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, pretending not to wait for me. The TV was paused on some Netflix drama, the kind she used to make me watch even when I was half asleep. I walked past her without a word, opened the fridge, and grabbed a Coke Zero. She looked up for a moment, then looked back down. The tension was thick enough to feel it pressing against my skin. Something strange started happening around that time. She began to mirror my quiet. At first, I thought it was pride, but then I realized it was uncertainty. She didn't know how to bridge the silence because for so long, I'd been the one who always fixed things. I was the problem solver, the provider, the man who made sure everything stayed balanced. Now I was letting the balance fall. A few days later, she asked if I wanted to join her and the kids for dinner out. She mentioned Chili's, one of those family places we used to go when money was tight. Normally, I'd agree. But this time, I just said, "You guys go ahead." I could see it hit her. That moment when she realized this wasn't temporary. That night, while the house was quiet, I thought about what had happened to us. Somewhere along the way, we'd both started living as if love was a job, something to clock in and out of. We traded affection for convenience, care for control. I wasn't blameless. I'd let resentment grow in silence, covering it with routine. But as I sat there, scrolling through my phone, a message from an old friend popped up. Just a simple, "Hey man, long time no talk." Funny how small things can light up the darkness. I didn't know it yet, but that message would change the course of everything that came next. His name was Mark. We'd gone to college together before life took us in different directions. Him to Florida, me to Colorado. He was one of those friends who always knew when to reach out, like he had radar for when things were about to fall apart. His message was simple, but it cracked something open. We started talking again, just small stuff at first, sports, old memories, dumb jokes about how we'd thought life would be easier by 40. But soon, the conversations got deeper. I told him about the distance at home, how my wife and I had stopped being partners and become polite roommates. He didn't offer advice, just listened. Sometimes, that's all a man really needs. One night, after another long call with Mark, I looked around my house and realized how sterile it felt. Everything was clean, organized, quiet, but lifeless. The kitchen counter was spotless. Her favorite candle from Bath & Body Works burned low, and the faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I sat there with a beer, staring at the framed family photo on the wall. We looked perfect in that picture. Beach vacation, matching sunglasses, the kids laughing between us. But now, I couldn't recognize the people in it. The next morning, she noticed something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the calm, maybe the lack of reaction. Over breakfast, she said she felt like I'd checked out emotionally. I told her I hadn't checked out. I'd just stopped fighting for something one-sided. She didn't argue. She just stared at her coffee, the steam curling between us like smoke after a fire. That weekend, I went hiking alone in the foothills. The air was cold, crisp, and silent. I hadn't done that in years. Somewhere near the top, I sat down, took out my phone, and texted Mark. "I think I'm done pretending." He just replied, "Then stop pretending." Simple, direct. It hit harder than I expected. When I came back home that evening, she was waiting. The kids were at her sister's, the house dimly lit, a glass of wine in her hand. She said she missed how we used to talk, how we used to laugh. But even as she said it, her voice sounded rehearsed, like someone reading lines from a script they didn't believe in anymore. I told her I missed that too, but I wasn't sure it could come back. And as the silence filled the room again, I realized we'd both been waiting for the other to make the first real move, and neither of us knew how anymore. The following days felt like a countdown to something neither of us could name. We still moved through the motions. Work, kids, bills. But beneath the surface, the foundation was crumbling. The silence wasn't just between us anymore. It filled every corner of the house, settling into the walls, the floorboards, even the air we breathed. I'd catch her looking at me across the dinner table, her eyes searching for the version of me she used to know. I didn't avoid her gaze, but I didn't meet it either. I just let the distance speak for itself. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, she asked if I'd go with her to a friend's birthday dinner. Normally, I'd say yes without thinking. This time, I told her I had plans. That wasn't true. My only plan was to sit in the truck, parked outside a 7-Eleven, drinking bad coffee and thinking. I didn't even know why I lied. Maybe because I wanted her to feel the space she'd created. Maybe because I needed to feel what solitude actually meant again. It started to rain. The kind of soft, steady rain that makes the world slow down. I sat there, watching droplets slide down the windshield, replaying the last few years in my head. Somewhere along the way, I turned into a version of myself I didn't recognize. Dependable, predictable, emotionally invisible. I'd thought being a good husband meant always being available, always showing up. But now I saw how easily that kind of love turns into background noise. She came home late that night. I heard the door, the sound of her heels on the hardwood, the faint rustle as she set her purse down. I stayed on the couch, eyes half closed, pretending to sleep. She paused near me for a long moment, like she wanted to say something, but then she just whispered goodnight and went upstairs. The next morning, there was a note on the counter. It wasn't dramatic, Just a few lines saying she was staying with her sister for a few days. No anger, no accusations. Just distance made official. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it under my car keys. For the first time in years, I felt something unexpected, relief. Not joy, not sadness, just the sense that the weight had shifted. I didn't chase after her, didn't call or text. I just let the silence do its work. And that silence, as heavy as it was, started teaching me something I'd never learned before. Sometimes, love doesn't die in shouting matches or betrayals. It dies quietly, in the space between two people who stop trying to be understood. The house felt different without her. Quieter, yes, but also lighter, like the air itself had exhaled. I started noticing small things again. The hum of the fridge, the way the morning light hit the kitchen window, the sound of the kids' laughter echoing down the hall when they stayed over. It was strange how peace could feel so unfamiliar. I made breakfast for myself for the first time in years, burnt the toast, and laughed out loud. That simple sound, my own laughter, felt foreign and alive at the same time. Over the next few days, she didn't call. Neither did I. We exchanged short texts about the kids, nothing more. It was mechanical, almost businesslike. But beneath it all, I could feel something shifting inside me. Not bitterness, not regret, just a growing awareness that maybe this silence was what we both needed. Mark called one night while I was driving back from the gym. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was better than I expected. He said that sometimes distance reveals more truth than conversation ever could. His words stuck with me. I parked the truck near the old diner we used to go to as a family, neon sign flickering, the same smell of fried food and coffee in the air. I sat there for a while, just thinking. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who'd rush home from work to make sure dinner was ready, who'd fix everything before it even broke, who'd carry everyone's emotions like they were his own. Somewhere along the way, I turned myself into a background character in my own life. I was always giving, always available, but rarely present for myself. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for reconciliation or chase her to prove a point. I wasn't going to perform. I was going to rebuild, even if it meant starting from silence. The next morning, I woke early, made strong black coffee in my old Keurig, and went for a run. The cold air stung my lungs, but it felt clean, like a reset. By the time I got back, my phone buzzed. It was her, a short message asking if we could talk that evening. Something in me tightened. Not fear, not hope, something between them. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down on the counter. For the first time in our marriage, I realized I had nothing to lose, and that made me stronger than I'd been in years. That evening, she came over. The kids were still at her sister's, so it was just the two of us. I heard her car pull up, the familiar sound of the engine, the click of her heels on the walkway, the pause at the front door before the key turned. For a second, I almost expected her to walk in like nothing had happened, like this was just another Thursday night. But when she stepped inside, I saw the difference immediately. Her eyes looked tired, not just from lack of sleep, but from carrying something heavy she hadn't wanted to admit. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where everything had started to fall apart. She spoke first. Her voice was soft, careful, like she was testing the air. She said she'd been thinking a lot, that she missed how things used to be, that she didn't recognize who we'd become. I listened quietly. No interruptions, no reactions. Just silence. She told me she thought space would help her figure out what she wanted, but instead, it made her realize how much she'd taken for granted. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to believe her, but part of me was still standing behind that invisible wall I'd built. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, but I also wasn't the same man she'd left a week ago. I'd stopped trying to fill every empty moment with effort. I'd stopped giving on demand. She looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of her sweater. She said she didn't want to lose the family we'd built, that maybe we both needed to learn how to stop treating love like a transaction. For the first time in months, she wasn't defensive. There was something real in her tone. Fear, vulnerability, maybe even remorse. The clock ticked loudly between us. I stared at the old family calendar still hanging on the fridge, covered in notes and reminders that no longer mattered. My chest tightened with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not relief, but possibility. She asked if we could start over. Not pretend nothing happened. but start clean. I didn't give an answer right away. Instead, I stood up, poured her a cup of coffee from the old Keurig, and slid it across the counter. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something smaller, a gesture, quiet and unfinished. But sometimes, that's how things begin again. When she left that night, I didn't feel closure. I felt the weight of choice. For the first time, it wasn't about fixing her or us. It was about deciding whether I still believed in what we could be. The next few days passed in a strange calm. She texted more often, small things, updates about the kids, photos from their weekend, a recipe she said I'd like. It wasn't forced, but it wasn't effortless either. Each message felt like she was testing the temperature of the water before stepping back in. I didn't ignore her, but I didn't chase the conversation either. I'd learned that silence has a language of its own, and right now, it was speaking louder than anything either of us could say. One Saturday morning, she showed up at the house with the kids. She said they missed their rooms, and I could tell by her tone that she did too. The kids ran upstairs while we stood in the kitchen again, that same place where everything always seemed to circle back. She looked around quietly, noticing how I'd rearranged a few things, cleaned up, even replaced the old flickering bulb above the counter. She said the house felt different. I told her it was because I'd started taking care of it for myself, not just for everyone else. There was a pause after that, a long one. I could see something shift in her expression, something like realization. She'd gotten used to the version of me that gave endlessly without asking for much in return. But that man was gone. Later that day, we all went for a drive. It was her idea. She said it might be good for the kids, maybe for us too. We stopped for burgers at Five Guys, the same place I'd eaten alone weeks earlier. The kids laughed, fries spilled everywhere, the air filled with that familiar smell of grease and ketchup. It felt normal, almost too normal. But under that moment of peace, there was still a pulse of uncertainty, like both of us knew it could collapse with one wrong word. That night, after the kids fell asleep, she lingered by the door. She said she missed being here, that the quiet in her sister's house felt different, not peaceful, but empty. I didn't respond. I just nodded. She waited a second longer, like she wanted to ask if she could stay, but then whispered goodnight and left. When the door closed, I stood there for a while, listening to the silence that followed. For the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like space to think, to breathe, to decide. I didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the start of something we'd both have to face. The truth about why we'd fallen apart, and whether either of us was brave enough to rebuild what we'd both broken. A week later, she called and asked if we could meet, just the two of us. No kids, no distractions. Her voice was calm but uncertain, the kind of tone you use when you've made a decision but don't know how it will land. I agreed, though part of me hesitated. We met at a small coffee shop downtown, one we used to go to years ago when we were still figuring out who we were as a couple. The place hadn't changed much. Same worn wooden tables, same smell of espresso and baked bread. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She said she'd been thinking about everything, about how she'd stopped seeing me long before she stopped touching me. That somewhere between kids, bills, and the comfort of routine, she'd mistaken my consistency for indifference. I listened quietly, watching the way her fingers trembled slightly as she spoke. She said she realized she'd been expecting love to show up without effort, while I'd been giving effort without asking for love in return. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The hum of conversation around us faded into a kind of suspended silence. I told her I wasn't angry anymore, but I was different. I couldn't go back to the man who tried to earn his place in his own marriage. She nodded slowly, like she'd known I'd say that. Then she said something that caught me off guard. That maybe change didn't have to mean ending. Maybe it just meant starting from honesty for the first time. We walked outside afterward, the air cool and sharp. The city lights flickered against the wet pavement. She reached for my arm out of habit, then stopped herself. I didn't move away, but I didn't reach back either. There was no bitterness, just an understanding that the version of us we used to be was gone. When I got home that night, I sat on the porch with a beer, the same brand I'd been drinking since college. The world felt quiet again, but not empty. I realized something simple, but powerful. Sometimes you have to let everything collapse before you can see what's worth rebuilding. She texted later, just one line. Thank you for meeting me. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Thank you for being honest. It wasn't a resolution. It was a door left open, just wide enough for light to come through. The days that followed were quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt empty. It was the kind that comes when things begin to settle, when the chaos finally runs out of energy. She started stopping by more often, sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. We didn't talk about the past much. Instead, we talked about small things. The kids' grades. The new coffee flavor at Starbucks she'd fallen in love with. The fact that I'd finally fixed the leaky faucet she'd complained about for years. It was strange how normal those moments felt, considering how far we'd fallen. One evening, she came over after work. The kids were with her parents. We sat outside on the porch, the sun setting behind the trees, the air cooling into that early autumn chill. She said she'd been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why she'd built walls she didn't even realize were there. She said it wasn't about blame anymore. It was about responsibility. She wanted to rebuild, but not from obligation, not from fear of losing the family. She wanted to rebuild because she finally understood what it meant to show up. I didn't respond right away. I just listened, watching how the light caught the side of her face. For so long, I tried to force connection, to prove myself through effort. But now, sitting there, I realized something important. The only version of love that lasts is the one that's freely chosen every single day. She asked if I could ever trust her again. I told her trust isn't something you rebuild with promises. It's something that grows back in the small, consistent choices people make when no one's watching. She nodded, not offended, just accepting. There was something peaceful in that. Later that night, after she left, I stood in the kitchen with the lights off. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel like it used to. It didn't feel lonely. It felt alive, like it was waiting. I realized the silence I'd once used as a weapon had turned into space for clarity, for both of us. Before going to bed, I checked my phone. There was a message from her. Dinner tomorrow? Just us. I didn't overthink it. I just typed back, sure. It wasn't reconciliation yet. It was two people learning to walk toward each other again, one careful step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. The night we finally sat down for dinner felt different. It wasn't a reunion, not exactly, and it wasn't a goodbye either. It was something quieter, something real. We met at a small restaurant near the edge of town, one of those cozy places where the lights are low and the music barely fills the space. I got there first. The waiter brought me water, and I sat watching the door, not nervous, but aware. When she walked in, wearing that simple gray sweater she always loved, I realized how long it had been since I'd really seen her. Not just looked at her, seen her. She smiled, unsure, like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to. We ordered dinner, talked about the kids, her job, the small things that hold a life together. But underneath all of it, there was a different rhythm, calm, slower, unforced. No one was trying to win, or prove, or fix. It felt like two people finally meeting each other again without the armor. Halfway through dinner, she said she'd been scared that I'd moved on, not to someone else, but away from her emotionally. I told her that for a while, I had. I needed to. Because the man I'd been before, the one who gave endlessly, who tried to hold everything together, had forgotten what it felt like to have his own boundaries. I said I didn't stop loving her. I stopped losing myself in trying to make her happy. She looked down for a long moment, then said she understood. That maybe what she'd mistaken for withdrawal was actually self-respect. The word hung between us like a truth that had been waiting too long to be spoken. We finished dinner slowly. When the check came, she reached for it first, then laughed softly when I stopped her. Old habits, she said. I smiled. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like we were repeating the same cycle. It felt like a new one was beginning. Fragile, uncertain, but honest. Outside, the air was cool, the streets nearly empty. We stood by her car, the moment stretching. She said she didn't expect promises, just presence. I told her that was all I had left to give, and maybe that was finally enough. When she drove away, I stood there for a while, watching the taillights fade into the dark. I didn't know where this road would lead, whether it would bring us back together or just help us both heal. But for the first time in years, I felt peace, not the silence of avoidance, but the stillness that comes when you finally stop fighting what's already true. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.